At 10:15 a.m. on a Thursday, I watched 8 years of my work disappear from every screen in the building. The customer portal crashed, not slow, not buggy, completely dead. 400 enterprise clients suddenly couldn't access their accounts, their data, their custom dashboards I'd spent years perfecting. The help desk phones started ringing like slot machines in Vegas, and I could see Madison Pierce through the glass walls of her corner office, frantically typing on her laptop while 3 expensive consultants stood around looking confused. My name is Benjamin Hoffman. I'm 52 years old, and I was about to become the most popular guy in the building for all the wrong reasons. You know how it is when you're the guy who built something from scratch and then watch someone else try to improve it? That's what happened here. Madison, fresh out of business school with her MBA and a head full of buzzwords, had decided my legacy systems needed a complete overhaul. The same systems that had been running Pierce Technologies smoothly for 8 years. Let me back up a bit. When I started at Pierce, their idea of enterprise software was Excel spreadsheets shared on a network drive. Their server room looked like a garage sale, and their backup strategy was burning CDs twice a month. Allison Pierce, the CEO who inherited the company from her father, knew enough to realize they needed help. That's where I came in. I built their entire IT infrastructure from the ground up. Every server, every security protocol, every database relationship. I designed custom integrations that improved their processing efficiency by 35% and implemented enterprise software that could handle real business volume. Their old system couldn't support more than 50 concurrent users without choking. Mine scaled to 5,000 without breaking a sweat. For 8 years, I was the guy who kept everything running. Weekend emergencies, 3 a.m. security patches, vendor negotiations that saved them hundreds of thousands in licensing fees. I trained their staff, documented every process, and turned a small family business into something that could compete with companies 10 times their size. The thanks I got? A cubicle next to the copier and an annual review where Allison told me I needed to be more collaborative with the younger team members. But I stayed because the work mattered. You build something that people depend on, something that actually works, and there's pride in that. Plus, at my age, you don't jump ship lightly. Mortgage payments don't care about your professional frustrations, and my wife Carol was already nervous about me being in tech at 52. Then Madison showed up. Madison is Allison's niece, 26 years old with an MBA from Northwestern and 0 real-world experience. She talked a good game though: agile methodology, digital transformation, cloud-native architecture, all the buzzwords that make executives think they're getting their money's worth. Within a week, she had a corner office and a direct line to Allison. Within a month, she was heading up Project Renaissance, a complete overhaul of the technology stack I'd spent 8 years building. The breaking point came at what Allison called an all-hands strategic alignment meeting. You know, the type: mandatory attendance, catered bagels, and an agenda that's basically we're about to screw somebody over and want witnesses. Madison brings fresh perspective to our infrastructure challenges, Allison announced, beaming at her niece like she'd just discovered fire. She'll be leading our transition to a cloud-native, AI-enabled platform that will position us for the next decade of growth. I sat there listening to Madison talk about legacy system deprecation and containerized microservices while nodding along like she knew what any of it actually meant. When someone asked about data migration timelines, she gave some vague answer about iterative implementation phases. That's when I knew she was in way over her head. See, our system isn't just software you can swap out like upgrading your phone. It's a complex ecosystem of custom integrations, enterprise licensing agreements, and vendor relationships that took years to build. The database alone has 47 different integration points, each one customized for specific client workflows. But Madison didn't want to hear about complexity. She wanted innovation, and she wanted it delivered by someone young enough to make the company look forward thinking to the board. After the meeting, she cornered me by the coffee machine. "Ben, right?" she said, holding her tablet like a security blanket. "I'm going to need you to walk me through the current architecture. Maybe we can schedule some knowledge transfer sessions?" Knowledge transfer. Like 8 years of enterprise systems engineering could be downloaded in a PowerPoint presentation. "Sure," I said. "What's your timeline?" She checked her calendar app. "How about next week?" "I'm pretty booked with stakeholder meetings this week." Stakeholder meetings? She'd been there 2 weeks and was already talking like a consultant. I spent that weekend going through our vendor contracts and licensing agreements. What I found would have made me smile if it wasn't so damn depressing. Every major system component required my personal certification for support renewals. Every enterprise license was tied to my name. Every custom integration depended on vendor relationships I'd built over decades in this industry. I hadn't planned it that way, it's just how enterprise architecture works when you're the guy who built it. You become the hub because that's the only way to maintain security, performance, and vendor compliance. Monday morning, Madison sent me a calendar invite titled Legacy System Deep Dive Transition Planning. Legacy System. The infrastructure that kept their entire operation running was now legacy. I showed up to the conference room with our complete technical documentation, about 200 pages of vendor agreements, system, specifications, and integration protocols. Madison had her laptop and a notebook that said Digital Innovation Strategy on the cover. "So," she said, clicking her pen, "let's start with the database architecture. I'm thinking we can migrate everything to a cloud-based solution pretty quickly." I slid the first binder across the table. "These are our current Oracle licensing agreements. Take a look at section 12.4. She flipped through the pages, her confident expression slowly fading. "This says the enterprise license is non-transferable without primary administrator recertification?" "That's right. And the primary admin credentials are tied to my personal Oracle certification. I have to renew it annually and maintain the vendor relationship, or we lose enterprise support." She kept reading, and I could see the wheels turning. "What about our client integrations?" I opened the second binder. Custom APIs I developed for each major client's workflow. The documentation is here, but implementing changes requires understanding both our internal protocols and each client's specific requirements. Madison stared at the documentation like it was written in ancient Greek. How long would it take to transition this knowledge to someone else? I leaned back in my chair. Full knowledge transfer with proper training and certification. 6 months minimum. Maybe a year if you want to maintain current functionality and performance. Her face went pale. "The board expects Project Renaissance to be operational in 90 days. I shrugged. "Then you better hope nothing breaks in the meantime." That's when my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. A former colleague at TechCorp Industries was asking if I'd be interested in a senior architect position. The salary range was 20% higher than what I was making at Pierce. Looking at Madison's panicked expression, I decided it might be worth a conversation. 2 weeks later, the first disaster hit. Madison's consulting team decided to optimize our backup protocols by migrating them to a new cloud storage system. Sounds simple enough, right? Hell, I probably would have thought the same thing if I didn't know how everything connected under the hood. Here's what they didn't understand. Our backup system wasn't just storing files. It was integrated with our disaster recovery protocols, which fed into our compliance reporting, which connected directly to our quarterly financial statements. Change one piece, and you risk breaking the whole chain. At 9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, our financial reporting system went dark. I was in my cubicle when Janet from accounting called. "Ben, the monthly reports aren't generating. System says there's a data source error." I could have walked over to Madison's war room and offered to help. Instead, I opened that LinkedIn message from TechCorp and replied that yes, I'd be interested in learning more about their senior architect position. By noon, Madison was in full panic mode. She'd called an emergency, meeting with her consulting team, trying to figure out why their simple optimization had killed our financial systems. I watched through the glass as she gestured frantically at her laptop, while 3 guys in expensive suits nodded and took notes like they had a clue. At 2 p.m., Allison's assistant sent a company-wide email. "Minor technical difficulties with reporting systems. Full functionality will be restored shortly." By 5 p.m., we were still down. By 6 p.m., Madison was calling me. "Ben, I know you're probably heading home, but we've got a situation. The consulting team thinks there might be some dependencies they missed." Dependencies they missed, like the 30-page technical specification I'd written documenting exactly those dependencies. "I can take a look," I said. "What's your timeline? We really need this fixed tonight. Board meeting is tomorrow morning and Allison needs the quarterly numbers." I drove back to the office and spent 4 hours untangling their mess. The actual fix took 15 minutes once I identified what they'd broken. The rest of the time was spent documenting what they'd need to know to avoid making the same mistake again. When I handed Madison the incident report the next morning, she barely looked up from her laptop. "Thanks, Ben. The consulting team says they have a much better handle on the system architecture now. No apology, no acknowledgement that their optimization had nearly killed the quarterly board meeting, just confidence that they'd learned enough from one screw-up to avoid making others. That's when I started making copies of everything. You know that feeling when you realize you're working for people who don't respect what you do? I'd been getting that feeling for months, but this was the moment it crystallized. Every email about Project Renaissance, every change request, every technical specification they'd ignored, I saved it all to a secure drive. I also started documenting the gaps. The things Madison's team didn't know they didn't know. The vendor relationships that weren't just contracts but personal trust built over years. The custom workarounds I'd implemented to solve problems they didn't even realize existed. 3 weeks later came disaster number 2. Madison's team decided to upgrade our customer portal to a modern, mobile responsive platform. Again, sounds reasonable on paper. The problem was, their new platform couldn't handle the custom authentication protocols I'd built for our enterprise clients. Monday morning, 9 a.m., half our major customers couldn't log into their accounts. This time, Madison didn't call me. She called the consulting firm's emergency support line and paid premium rates for 6 hours of troubleshooting. They couldn't figure it out either. By Wednesday, we'd lost our 2 biggest clients. Hartwell Industries, who I'd worked with for 8 years building their custom reporting dashboard, sent a termination notice. Their IT director called me directly. "Ben, what the hell is going on?" "Over there? Our systems have been down for 3 days, and nobody can give us a straight answer." I explained that I wasn't involved in the current technical decisions at Pierce. "Actually," I said, "TechCorp just launched a new enterprise platform. I'm consulting with them on implementation. It's designed specifically for manufacturing workflows like yours." 2 weeks later, Hartwell signed with TechCorp. The contract was worth more than my entire annual salary at Pierce. Allison called an emergency staff meeting. She stood at the front of the conference room looking like someone who'd just realized the house was on fire and the insurance had lapsed. "We've had some challenges with our system transition," she said, "but we're committed to delivering the technological advancement our clients expect." Madison sat in the front row looking like she'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks. Moving forward, Allison continued, "We're taking a more collaborative approach to technical implementations. Ben, I'd like you to work more closely with Madison's team." Translation: "Please fix this mess while we pretend it was a team effort." After the meeting, Madison cornered me again. This time the confidence was gone. "Ben, I need your help. The board is asking questions, and honestly, this is more complex than I initially understood. Like enterprise architecture was something you could grasp after skimming a few articles about cloud computing." "What kind of help?" I asked. "Full partnership, co-lead on the project, whatever it takes to get this back on track." I looked at her for a long moment. A month ago, she'd been talking about sunsetting my legacy systems. Now she wanted me to save her project. "Let me think about it," I said. That evening, Carol and I talked it over at dinner. She'd been watching me get more frustrated with work for months, seeing me come home stressed about things that used to energize me. "You know what this is, don't you?" she said, cutting into her chicken. "It's not about the technology. It's about them not respecting what you built." She was right. And sitting there in our kitchen, looking at the mortgage statement on the counter and thinking about how many good years I had left in this industry, I made a decision. Thursday morning, I called TechCorp and scheduled a final interview. Friday afternoon, I cleaned out my desk and typed up a resignation letter. 2 weeks' notice, professional courtesy, effective immediately upon completion of transition documentation. I printed it out, sealed it in an envelope, and walked into Allison's office. She read it twice, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure panic. "Ben, we need to talk about this. The timing couldn't be worse." "The timing is perfect," I said. "You wanted fresh perspectives and innovation. Now you've got them." I walked out, got in my car, and drove home to tell Carol I'd just quit my job. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Monday morning, I started at TechCorp as Senior Systems Architect. My first project was conducting a competitive analysis of companies in our market sector. Pierce Technologies was at the top of the list. 6 weeks into my new job at TechCorp, the phone calls started. Not to me directly, I wasn't at Pierce anymore, but word travels fast in our industry when a major system starts falling apart. The first crack appeared when Pierce's Oracle licensing came up for renewal. Suddenly, they discovered that their enterprise database support required annual recertification by the primary administrator. That would be me. except I was 30 miles away in a different company, building competitive analysis reports on their market position. Without current certification, their license reverted to basic support. No more 24/7 technical assistance, no more priority patches, no more direct line to Oracle's enterprise team when something broke. And things were breaking regularly now. Madison's consulting team had patched together enough functionality to keep the lights on, but they'd built their solutions on top of my architecture without understanding the foundation. It was like renovating a house by putting new wallpaper over electrical problems. Everything looked fine until you plugged in too many appliances. The first major client loss came in week 8. Continental Manufacturing, one of Pierce's oldest accounts, couldn't access their custom reporting dashboard. The problem was buried in API integrations I'd built specifically for their workflow 6 years ago. Madison's team spent a week trying to reverse engineer my code. They got basic functionality working eventually, but it was slow, unreliable, and missing half the features Continental actually used. Continental's IT director, Mike Stevens, called me directly. I'd worked with him for years implementing their system, and he trusted my technical judgment more than he trusted sales pitches. "Ben, what's going on over at Pierce? Our reports are taking forever to generate, and half our data fields are showing up blank." I explained that I was no longer with Pierce Technologies and suggested he might want to explore other options. "Actually," I said, "TechCorp just launched a new manufacturing analytics platform. I'm leading the implementation team. It's built specifically for workflows like yours." 3 weeks later, Continental signed a 3-year contract with TechCorp. Their monthly service fee was more than I used to make in a quarter at Pierce. The second call came from Janet in Pierce's accounting department. She sounded desperate. "Ben, I know you don't work here anymore, but nobody understands how the financial systems connect. The new team says it's a legacy architecture issue, and they need 6 weeks to rebuild the reporting pipeline." 6 weeks. The quarterly board meeting was in 10 days. "I'm consulting full-time now," I told her. "If Pierce wants to engage my services, they'll need to go through official channels." 2 hours later, my phone rang. Allison Pierce. "Ben." Her voice was strained, controlled. "We're having some technical difficulties that the current team can't resolve quickly. I heard. Financial reporting can be tricky when you don't understand the architecture. Look, I'll be direct. We need you to come in and fix this. Just temporarily, until we get the new systems operational." I opened my consulting rate sheet on my laptop. At TechCorp, I'd learned what senior architects actually charged for emergency work. I'd be happy to discuss a short-term engagement. My rate for crisis intervention is $150 per hour, with a 40-hour minimum. Silence. $150 per hour? That's standard for emergency system recovery. If you prefer a project-based approach, I can quote $25,000 for financial system restoration with a 2-week completion guarantee. More silence. My old salary at Pierce had been $95,000 per year. I was quoting them more than a quarter of that for 2 weeks of work. "Let me discuss this with the board." She didn't call back that day. Instead, I got a LinkedIn message from Madison that evening. "Ben, I know things ended badly, but I really need your help. The board is asking questions I can't answer. Is there any way we could work something out?" I replied through LinkedIn's professional messaging. Pierce Technologies can contact TechCorp's business development team to discuss consulting services. What I didn't mention was that TechCorp had just signed 2 more of Pierce's former clients, companies that had gotten tired of system outages and wanted to work with a firm that understood enterprise architecture. The third major disaster came 3 months after I left. Pierce's entire customer portal crashed during peak business hours. Not slow performance completely offline, Madison's team had been implementing a security update and corrupted the authentication database. The database containing 8 years of customer data, transaction histories, and integration protocols. They had backups, sure, but the backups were in the old format, using compression and encryption that only worked with the original system architecture. The architecture I'd designed, documented, and tried to explain before Madison decided it was outdated technology. The restoration took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of Pierce Technologies running a multi-million-dollar business with spreadsheets and phone calls. By day 10, the story had reached the trade publications. Pierce Technologies suffers extended system outage was the headline in Enterprise Tech Weekly. The article quoted industry analysts questioning whether Pierce had the technical infrastructure to remain competitive. One of those analysts worked for TechCorp's consulting division. He was very thorough in his assessment. During those 2 weeks, Pierce lost 8 more clients. 3 others sent formal notices that they were evaluating alternative service providers. The board called an emergency meeting. I heard about it from a former colleague who still worked there. Allison had to explain to the directors why their modernization project had resulted in the worst quarter in company history. Madison wasn't at that meeting. Word was she'd already started interviewing at other companies. The next week, I got a call from Pierce's head of business development. Not Allison, not Madison, someone from sales who understood that technical problems were killing their ability to close deals. Ben, I'm going to be straight with you. We're hemorrhaging clients. The board wants answers about our technology strategy. We need help from someone who understands what we built here. What kind of help? Full consulting engagement. You design the recovery plan, you oversee implementation, you have final authority on technical decisions. Whatever rate you quote, we'll approve it. I quoted them $45,000 for a complete system assessment and recovery plan. They accepted without negotiating. The recovery project took 3 months. I rebuilt their core systems using modern architecture but maintaining compatibility with existing client integrations. I trained their technical staff properly this time, real documentation, hands-on workshops, not PowerPoint presentations. Most importantly, I designed the new system to be maintainable by their internal team. No single points of failure, no dependencies on individual knowledge, no vendor relationships tied to personal certifications. When I finished, Pierce Technologies had better infrastructure than when I'd left. The difference was, now they understood what they had and how to maintain it. Allison offered me my old job back, Director of Technology, $120,000 salary, equity stake in the company. I turned it down. I appreciate the offer, I told her, but TechCorp has promoted me to VP of Strategic Architecture. Plus, you don't really need me anymore. You've got solid systems and a team that understands them. What I didn't mention was that my new role came with a $140,000 salary and responsibility for a $3 million modernization portfolio. Or that 2 other firms had reached out about senior positions. Or that my consulting practice had a 4-month waiting list. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or explosive. Sometimes it's just proving your worth in a place that recognizes it. Last month, I got a LinkedIn message from Madison. She's working for a startup now doing product management for enterprise software. She thanked me for teaching her to respect the complexity of business systems and asked if I'd provide a reference. I said yes. Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. But I also made sure to mention that good architecture starts with understanding what you're building before you decide what needs to be replaced. 2 years later, I ran into Allison at the Enterprise Technology Conference in Chicago. She was standing near the coffee station, looking older and more tired than I remembered. The conference badge hanging around her neck read Pierce Technologies CEO, but the company booth was noticeably smaller than TechCorp's sprawling display across the hall. She saw me before I could decide whether to say hello. Ben, she said, walking over with what looked like a genuine smile. I was hoping I'd see you here. How are things at TechCorp? Good, I said, really good. VP of Strategic Architecture now. We just landed the Meridian account. Her smile faltered slightly. Meridian had been Pierce's biggest prospect for over a year. Congratulations. That's a big win. We stood there for a moment, 2 people who used to work together making polite conversation in a crowded convention center. The elephant in the room was obvious to both of us, but neither wanted to be the first to mention it. Listen, she finally said, I owe you an apology. What happened with Madison and the whole modernization project? I handled that badly. I appreciated the acknowledgement, but it was water under the bridge now. How's the company doing? Better? Much better, actually. After you finished the recovery project, we hired a solid technical team. People who understand what they're working with before they try to change it. She paused. Madison taught us all an expensive lesson about the difference between innovation and disruption. Where is Madison now? Product management at a fintech startup. She's actually doing well there. Turns out she's good at understanding customer needs. Just not so great at enterprise architecture. Allison laughed, but it was rueful. We probably should have started her in a role that matched her actual skills. That was the thing about this whole situation. Nobody was really the villain here. Madison was young and overconfident, but she wasn't malicious. Allison was trying to modernize her father's company and thought youth automatically meant innovation. They'd both learned something from the experience. You know what the funny thing is? Allison continued. The system you rebuilt for us is exactly what Madison was trying to create with Project Renaissance. Modern, scalable, maintainable. She just didn't understand that you can't get there by throwing out everything that works. I nodded. Enterprise architecture is like renovating an old house while people are still living in it. You can't just tear down walls without understanding what's holding up the roof. That's a good analogy. Mind if I steal it for my next board presentation? Feel free. We talked for another few minutes about industry trends, mutual connections, the usual conference small talk. As we were wrapping up, Allison asked the question I'd been expecting. Any chance you'd ever consider coming back? I know TechCorp is treating you well, but Pierce is stable now. We could offer competitive compensation, and honestly, the company culture is much better than it was 2 years ago. It was tempting in a way. Pierce was where I'd built my reputation, where I'd learned to be a real architect instead of just a programmer. There was something appealing about the idea of coming full circle. But I'd moved beyond that now. At TechCorp, I wasn't just maintaining systems, I was designing them from scratch for Fortune 500 clients. My team had grown from 3 people to 12. I was speaking at conferences, publishing articles, building the kind of professional reputation that opens doors across the industry. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I'm happy where I am. Besides, you don't need me anymore. You've got good people who understand what they're working with. She nodded, looking like she'd expected that answer but had to ask anyway. Well, if you ever change your mind, I'll let you know. After she walked away, I stood there for a moment thinking about how different my life was now compared to 2 years ago. Back then, I'd been frustrated, undervalued, watching younger people get opportunities I deserved. Now I was the guy other companies called when they needed someone who understood how to build enterprise systems that actually worked. The thing is, none of this would have happened if I'd stayed at Pierce. I'd probably still be in that cubicle next to the copier, fixing other people's mistakes and getting no credit for keeping the lights on. Sometimes getting pushed out of your comfort zone is exactly what you need, even when it doesn't feel like it at the time. That evening, I called Carol from my hotel room to tell her about running into Allison. "Did she offer you your old job back?" Carol asked. "She did. And I told her thanks, but no thanks. We've got a good thing going here." Carol laughed. "You know, 2 years ago you were worried about being too old for this industry. Now you're the guy giving keynote speeches about enterprise architecture." She was right. At 54, I was more in demand than I'd ever been in my career. Experience matters in this business, and there's no substitute for having actually built systems that scale, that last, that people depend on. "By the way," Carol continued, "David from next door mentioned his company is looking for a technology consultant. Apparently their current system is held together with duct tape and hope. Tell him to send me an email." My consulting calendar is pretty full, but I might be able to squeeze in an assessment. That's the thing about building a reputation. Once people know you can solve their problems, they keep coming back. And they recommend you to other people with similar problems. 6 months later, I got a Christmas card from Madison. She was engaged to someone she'd met at her startup, and the company had just closed a $15 million funding round. She included a handwritten note. "Thanks for teaching me that good architecture is about understanding what you're building, not just what's trendy. Hope you're doing well." I was doing well. Really well. At TechCorp, I'd been promoted again to Senior VP of Enterprise Solutions. My team was handling some of the biggest modernization projects in the industry. I was making more money than I'd ever imagined when I was sitting in that cubicle at Pierce, and more importantly, I was doing work that mattered. The best part was that none of it felt like revenge anymore. It just felt like the natural progression of a career built on actually knowing how to do the job. You know what they say about success being the best revenge? That's not quite right. Success isn't revenge, it's proof. Proof that you were worth more than they recognized, that you had value they couldn't see, that their loss was someone else's gain. Sometimes the best way to win is just to keep building things that work, with people who appreciate what you do. Eventually, the market figures out who knows what they're talking about. And if you're patient enough, you might even get to watch your old boss realize they made a mistake, not because you rubbed their nose in it, but because the results speak for themselves.